So this morning we have a story which is actually part of a series of stories which some scholars actually think were about verifying Jesus as being the Messiah. The story that preceded this one is a story of crossing the sea, and the waves get really big and the wind is blowing and Jesus calms the storm. The story that follows is about a healing of a woman who has been bleeding, hemorrhaging, maybe had amenorrhea for years, and then also the raising to life again of a young girl. And then we have this story here. Now, this story, I'd actually like to go back and revisit with you, if that would be all right. You see, they arrived at the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. Now, we don't know exactly which place that was, but quite likely it's a place called Gadara. And Gadara was a strategic location that was popular among whoever was politically in control at the time. So the Greeks had controlled it, and now the Romans controlled it. Prior to that, it had been Syrians and various other rulers, and it was set up on a ridge where on the east side there was a gentle sloping, and then on the other three sides of this ancient town was very steep cliffs, and it overlooked the lake. And Gadara was significant because in around 66 of the Common Era, the beginning of the Jewish revolt, there was a big revolt that happened in Gadara as well among the Jews who were revolting against against Roman rule. And Rome came down on Gadara, did not care that it was a Jewish revolt, and slaughtered people regardless of age within the city and burned the city and the surrounding villas. Okay, this is a historical context. After that, some of the Gadara officials were able to capture some of the zealots and executed them. And so this was a violent place. And in the hearing of this scripture, people in the first century would have recognized the political implications of this location and interpreted some of the story that way. So we continue in the story. As he stepped out on land, a man of the city who had demons met him. For a long time he had worn no clothes, and he did not live in a house, but in the tombs. You might say he was homeless. When he saw Jesus, he fell down before him and shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For Jesus had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. See, for many times it had seized him. He was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles, but he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the wilds. Demons. Now, we're not big believers in demons these days. And yet, in the first century, they explained a lot of illness, a lot of events. You know, perhaps this man had a mental illness. Don't know. But these demons were the ones who were in control of his life. And so Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion." For many demons had entered him. They begged him not to order them to go back into the abyss. Legion. I mean, it's like one of those horror movies. Because there were so many voices in his head. There were so many voices living in him. He had no identity whatsoever. You know, have you ever known someone who you were trying to figure out just who they were. It's like you kept trying to peel back layers and you never felt like you actually get to the core of that person. That person has lost his or her identity. I mean, really, I can get that. I can get this sense that there are so many pressures on us. There's so many expectations of who we are to be, how we are supposed to act, who we're supposed to be in relationship, who we're supposed to be professionally, that we begin to get a loss of who we actually are. This loss of identity, it's tragic. And it's like we get defined by all of these outside forces. You can call them demons. I mean, we talk about, the demons within. We talk about, what it is that actually rules us. And we get trapped by that sometimes. Perhaps we end up being defined by what we look like. We get defined by our skin color or our gender, or maybe it's how we move. Maybe we get defined by our disability. Or perhaps we are defined by the religious label that we have on us. Have you ever wanted to try to explain to someone, yes, I'm Christian, but I'm not like those Christians? Huh? We're trying to redefine what we think that others have for us. Or maybe we ourselves have been defining someone else based on their religion or based on their sexual orientation, based on where they come from or the language they use. And we find that we too tend to see them in particular ways. Or perhaps we get caught by our past. Perhaps we get caught by the definitions that we used to have in a life that doesn't quite fit who we are now. And yet, we can't let that go. We can't completely move on. I was a PhD student for a very long time, and sometimes it still comes back to haunt me, that unfinished dissertation. And I think, oh, failure. Trapped by that demon. And yet, we often find ourselves also trapped by things we can't let go. Perhaps they are behaviors, perhaps they are addictions, perhaps they are ways of relating. Maybe we go through cycles of relationships that just aren't quite healthy, and we are trapped by those. You see, we can understand this guy with Legion. And maybe we too we crave liberation from that. We crave that freedom from the addictions. We crave that freedom to be new people, to be different from who we used to be, to not be constantly defined by how we used to be in relationship or how we used to be in our outlook of the world. Or maybe we even just crave to be seen as more complex people. We're not just female or male. We're not just Christian or progressive. We're not just white or African American or Hispanic. We're not just American. It's like we are people who have complex identities, and we're influenced by all that life brings us. And maybe sometimes we just wish that other people would see that. We get that craving, that desire to be seen as whole people. Now there on the hillside, a large herd of swine was feeding, and the demons begged Jesus to let them enter these. So he gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. Pigs. A herd of filthy, noisy, unclean pigs. the first century hearers, whether they were Jews or not, they would get this was not a nice association. And for the first century hearers, they might have heard that this was a reference to the Roman legions, those Romans who were violently oppressing and controlling them. And God was not done, because they were going to be thrown off a cliff. They were going to drown. Pigs. We use pigs in contemporary life sometimes. You remember the 60s? You see, sometimes in our craving to be free, we want to be exercised, and we want our demons to be utterly destroyed. We see them as negative creatures, and we want them to be drowned, because we want this demonic spell that holds on to us to be broken. Similarly, we want the demons that are involved in the structures and policies in our nation and our world to be destroyed. We want those demons to be exorcised. We want there to be whole people. We want to be seen as whole, and we want our society to be whole. You see, this story, this exorcism, isn't just about individuals. It's about a whole people. It is about a collective. It's about a community. It's about being freed from what has trapped them. And so when the swine herds, those people who would take care of those pigs, saw what had happened, they ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came out to see what had happened. And when they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. I read that and I saw The Exorcist in my mind. I saw that head spinning around. They were like, what happened? I mean, this is really the head spinner. Not the person with the demons, but the person freed from them. And you know what? They were afraid. Those who had seen it told them and how the one who had been possessed by demons had been healed. Then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them, for they were seized with great fear. It is ironic. Don't you think? It's not the crazy guy. It's not the guy who was demonic. The guy who they would bind with chains and they'd have guards, and this guy would break the chains. He would run through the guards, run free. This guy who could not be controlled, they wanted him back. They were afraid of this quiet, mild-mannered individual sitting there in his right mind because he was making sense. You see, when we are freed from our demons, it shakes things up. When we begin to see things a different way, it rocks the boat. When we start to look at life differently, it's not a comfortable place. We may feel liberated, but those around us are not quite so sure, because all of a sudden what they have expected to happen doesn't, and something else does. And to me, that's the crux of the story. You see, we want people to be predictable. I mean, we talk about how we want the world to change, and yet if it doesn't change in the ways we want it back how it used to be. I remember being in South Africa, and I was there from the period of 96 to 99, and so when I went, the beginning of 1996, it was 2 years after liberation from apartheid. It was 2 years since the new government was elected. It was a whole new era in South Africa. And during my time there, I cannot tell you how many times I heard, regardless of skin color, people saying it was better how it used to be. Because things didn't work the same way anymore. There was shifting sands, and people were uncomfortable with that. They wanted the abuse of power back that they knew and were comfortable with. You know, we hear in relationships of abuse that it can be hard to leave those relationships because it's scarier not knowing what liberation looks like or might look like. The fear of failure might be greater than the fear of making it. You see, when we look at this from a systems theory approach, we realize that when someone shifts, someone is healed, someone stops drinking, someone decides to be in relationship differently, someone looks at politics differently, it doesn't just change their life. It changes all of those with whom they are in relationship. It shakes things up, and it is uncomfortable. And sometimes it becomes more than just uncomfortable. It's a scary thing to be liberated from demons. And yet, when we look as a community, are we open to the idea of our community changing, our community shifting, of seeing things in a new light, in a new way? So we got into the boat and returned. The man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him. But Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." So he went away, proclaiming throughout the city how much Jesus had done for him. This individual with a new identity did not want to stay where he was. And can we blame him? That was not a welcoming place for him. So, are we freed to live into our new identity? Are we freed to be able to become our full potential? Or are we still trapped by the demons that try to define us? Are we still pressured by a broader community or society that tries to contain us? But what about the community? What about us? Do we deny liberation of others into new identities? Are we trapped by our fear of the unknown? Are we bound by our past experience of what the interactions were like or what life was like that we can't see something new? Are we locked into status quo? Or are we open to the Spirit that is always seeking liberation? Are we open to a Spirit who wants liberation for us as individuals and as whole communities to move into that new reality of God's realm? We look at a child and we see the hope and the possibility of who he might grow up to be. Can we look at each other in the same light? I invite you this morning to take some time to reflect, some time to ponder.